そうっすか。 didn't have my routing right on this.
Who will be in charge of miking our folks?
I can do it, or he can do it here too. Either one of us could.
Okay, yeah, I'll just send them your way.
All right.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. Policy Institute forum.
Good morning, everyone. Ask everyone to get seated and we'll get started. My name is Natalie Gardner. I direct the Gardner Policy Institute. We want to welcome you to the Thomas S. Monson Center. This mansion serves as an embassy for the University of Utah downtown and is designed to be a center for policy leadership for our city, for our state, and it's really designed for events like today. Events like today are especially welcome to me on a day when we don't have a major winter event. And I don't know how you felt, but when I was journeying in this morning, I saw this sun in the sky and I felt like it was an unidentified flying object. It just seems like it's been a while. And anyway, in all seriousness, what a beautiful city and state we live in. We feel that today. And I like to think that this beauty shapes and influences our actions. That the sun, the snow, the mountains, the red rock, the heritage sites, and more all influence us to care even more deeply and influence our actions. And that we can take this love of place and translate it into actions that will make it even better, to create a well-informed citizenry, to be a community of doers in shaping the kind of world we want to live in. Today, we will learn about Utah's apartment market, a vital component of Utahns' lives. I'm grateful for the experts who will share their time and expertise with us today. I also want to thank the Gardner Institute team for their work on this. Nick Thuriot, Colleen Larson, Dayon Eskich. Can we give them a hand? I also want to thank the Salt Lake Tribune for partnering with us on this new series of forums we are calling Storytelling Through Data. The Gardner Policy Institute develops and shares economic, demographic, and public policy research that helps Utahns make informed decisions. The Salt Lake Tribune shares reporting that meets Utahns where they are and relates to their everyday circumstances. As important institutions in our state, the Gardner Institute and Salt Lake Tribune are collaborating to share data-informed solutions and focused conversations, like the one we're having today. This partnership furthers the mission of both entities by creating a more informed citizenry. I want to thank Lauren Gustus, Executive Editor of the Salt Lake Tribune, for this partnership. And with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Dayon, who's going to give us an overview of Utah's rental market, and then Lauren Gustus will moderate the discussion and introduce our panelists. So Dayon.
Good morning and welcome to this sunny day. This is my favorite part of my job, and thank you, Natalie, for starting us off on the right foot. I'm going to just do a quick little deep dive on what the data shows about the importance of home ownership and the disparities we have in the rental market. Starting just with the nation. If we look at net household wealth, but for homeowners in 2019, and we'll get new data from the Federal Reserve maybe later this year for 2020, the average median the median net worth for homeowners is $255,000. And if you are a renter, your median net worth in 2019 was just a little over $6,000. So disparities exist. So whether we believe in the philosophical wealth building through home ownership, it's the fact of our economy. The middle class's net wealth is locked up in the equity of their homes. So if you're a renter today, your opportunities for home ownership are getting harder and harder, and we'll touch on that a little bit. And disparities exist between racial and ethnic groups as well. For example, if we break out the 2019 data for wealth by race and ethnicity and by tenure, we can see in every instance that the gray graphs show homeowners have more wealth. What really stands out, if we compare white homeowners to black homeowners, white homeowners have about $200,000 more in net wealth. If we look at renter wealth, black renters have almost no wealth, okay, under $2,000 in general. If we look at, I don't have the graph for this, but if we look at wealth by age at the same time, so if we took the last two generations of millennials, Gen Xers, and baby boomers at 34 years of age, millennials in 2022 have the net wealth, they share about 12% of the total wealth. Gen Xers at 34 held just under 20% of the wealth. And baby boomers over 2.7 times more of millennials today. So each generation gets a little bit less share of that wealth. And it's important when we think about young people having to take care of the aging population, wealth later in life becomes a major factor how we play in society and the economy. So as we bring it home, opportunities for home ownership. So renters are stuck renting. What I'm showing here on the left is share of homeowners that cannot afford the median priced home in Utah. This is January of 2023, okay? 59% of homeowners were priced out of the housing market. 41% can't afford. Now the caveat, I did not include the equity existing homeowners have in their home because it varies. But if we look over to the right at renters, only 12% of our renters could afford the median price home in January. It's gotten even worse because interest rates have shot up since January, so that number is even less as of today. Rents continue to peak, rents have peaked in the four major Wasatch Front counties. If we go back all the way to 2000, we can see throughout the great financial crisis, we saw an up and a down. And as we got into COVID, we saw this astronomical increase in rents. Now, rents have come down since a little bit, asking rents, but they are still at historic levels. So how elevated did rents get? Okay, if we look at the same four Wasatch Front counties, and each one of those bars presents the absolute change in monthly asking rent by county by decade. So starting from 2020 to 2010, 2010 to 2020, that dark gray bar in the middle, and 2020 to 2022. We had a decade worth of rent growth happen in 2 years for every major county across the Wasatch Front. And incomes have not kept up. If we look at how incomes have changed in the 5-year period between 2016 and 2021, in Salt Lake County, rents increased 37%, incomes went up 18%. Okay, what stood out though in Utah County, incomes almost kept up with rents, where rents increased 28% and incomes increased 26.5%. My hunch tells me this is part of the in-migration that's occurred because of Silicon Slopes and the difficulties of getting into homeownership. I think a lot of renters have been newer incomers to our valley have been renting, and they're typically in higher paying tech jobs. So that's bumped up the household incomes in Utah County as a result. But if we look at, Davis County, only 7.8% increase in renter household incomes and 42% increase in rents and so forth. And the story is the same for Weber County. Now, what that's done is brought a lot of disparities into our market, and our renters are cost burdened. So 45% of Utah renters pay more than 30% of their income for rent. And what we see is by county, for example, if we look all the way to the right of this table, 46% of renters are cost burdened, and 48% in Utah County. We look at Washington County down south, nearly half of the renters there are priced out, are cost burdened as well. And so that creates more challenges for our housing disparities. And a fact that we're starting to see kind of play out right now is we're seeing evictions explode. So I have this new clip art I discovered in PowerPoint, but if we look at this dashed line, that's the 3-year average in monthly eviction filings pre-COVID. And so you can see where COVID starts, eviction moratoriums happen, and we've been gradually increasing eviction filings since. So, first hunch is, okay, we're getting back to the pre-COVID levels, but the caveat is we've spent over $200 million, and probably even more, on rental assistance. And that rental assistance expired in February, and you can see now the March data all the way to the right of that graph shows 1 month historic eviction filings as a result. So this, I think, is going to be the hot issue we deal with this year as a result. So with that, with that cheery note, I'll bring Lauren up here to get us going.
Thank you, Dehan. That's some sobering data. I'm sitting next to our reporter who's here this morning to cover the event, and we're both just shocked. Thank you to the Gardner Center for hosting us. Thank you for coming today. They say that a moderator cannot improve a conversation. A moderator can only screw it up. So I will do my best this morning to keep us moving. We've received a ton of questions, some from you, some from others via email, and we'll look to move through them as quickly as we can. If we have time, we'll move into the live and extemporaneous portion of a Q&A, but I do want to prioritize the ones that came in here. Before I do that, I want to reflect for just a minute more on this partnership. This is the first in a series of conversations. We welcome your thoughts and feedback and suggestions on other conversations we should be having and where we should be having them. And soon we'll introduce you to a new reporter. Her name is Megan Banta, and she's meant to cover data and work closely with the Gardner Institute to elevate the very good work that it's doing and put it in front of more people throughout the state. And we're able to do that because of support as a nonprofit, which we are now, from Kem Gardner and Zions Bank. So grateful to them for their support. We're here today to talk about rentals and how we can work to make them more affordable. So as by way of introductions, I'd like to ask you all, if you would not mind, introducing yourself, who you are, why you're here or what you do, and not in a philosophical capacity, just to say. And then also, if you've got just a short story or a remembrance of your first rental, perhaps in Utah, where that was or what that was like, I would love to hear that. So Nate, would you like to get us started?
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. So I'm Nate Bluen. I am state senator for District 13, which is kind of down in the Sugar House, South Salt Lake, Mill Creek, Murray, a little bit of West Valley City area. I am here because I am a renter. I think I'm one of potentially 3, maybe a couple more renters in the legislature. So to me, this is a personal issue that hits really close to home. We just saw some of these numbers that are concerning to me. I think I'm fortunate. I'm probably in that category where we could afford a place to buy eventually, but just with the market the way it is, we haven't gotten there yet. So as far as my first rental, actually, I think it was probably when I moved to Utah in 2009, about this time of the year. It was a similar storm situation too. I actually came out to ski. And I ended up in a hostel for a couple of weeks down on 9th South or something. And so that was an interesting situation. And I think eventually found a apartment on Craigslist that had some weird prompt about, how what I wanted, it was a weird question about how I would fit into their unit there. So good times, still renting 14 years later. Hopefully we'll get into the purchasing market soon, but I'm excited to be here.
Dan Lofgren. I'm the CEO of a development and management organization, Cowboy Partners and Cowboy Properties. We've been here for a very long time, involved in the rental market. My first rental, I'm old enough, it was a cave. I really don't have any remarkable story to tell you, Lauren. Thank you for inviting us to participate.
Thank you.
Dayon Eskich, Senior Research Fellow here at the Gardner Policy Institute. I have a few, I don't know whether to go the inappropriate or appropriate route. But,
We are live streaming, so.
my family and I migrated to the U.S. in '97, and we were welcomed by IRC into a rental. And it was night and day difference, being in Croatia and Bosnia. We had, and I'm not trying to say anything negative here, but, we had our own house, lived with our family, and we came to the U.S. to this tiny little apartment, and we were just kind of shocked.
Yeah.
And so that kind of helped us just to get our stuff together and keep moving up. And it took a couple of years to get into home ownership for my parents, but it's having that affordable rental that I think that helped them.
Yeah, that's great.
Good morning. My name is Tara Rollins, and I work for the Utah Housing Coalition, and we're a membership-based organization that is all about increasing housing people can afford. We are really focused on stabilizing people in their housing right now. So my story about rental is we moved here 28 years ago, and the vacancy rate was extremely low, as it is now. And my husband and I had never been to Utah, and we just decided to pick up and leave New Hampshire and come. And so we were back and forth and up and down the valley. I learned the roadways fairly quickly, but nobody wanted to rent to us because we didn't have a job. And so we finally were able to, I guess you would say, bribe somebody to rent to us. And so we paid 3 months rent. So that was $800 each month. We paid $900 for our dog. And then we paid the rent. So that was quite a bit of money that we had to put down, to be able to rent a place. And this is coming from a person that owned a home back home and had a great credit.
Thank you. We want to talk about solutions today, so I'd like to start with a question about the first-time homebuyer assistance program. And this is the legislation that was introduced by Senate President Stuart Adams. Governor Cox recently signed it, and it provides up to $20,000 for a first-time homebuyer, and there's a cap right on the price of that home. I think it's $450,000. Can you tell us a little bit, and maybe Nate, you can take this first question. Tell us a little bit about why you think this is helpful and what it may do.
Yeah, so I did vote for that bill. I think it is. I think it's a good step in the right direction. As someone, actually, I think I spoke on the floor about how I was probably one of the only people who might actually be able to take advantage of this in the legislature. So I think it's a great step. My only concern with that is I think there's a price cap on the purchase price for a home of something like $450,000. So I think it's probably looking more outside of Salt Lake County based off what I know about kind of the median homes, which is fine. We need housing all over the place, all across the Wasatch Front. I would have loved to see higher credits and all those things, but I think it is definitely a good step in the right direction. So hopefully we can just expand on that in the future.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for us to step up as a state, because as you saw, only 12% of renters can afford to get into home ownership. And Utah's always been a home ownership state. We're the only state, and Jim will always say this, since we started kind of keeping records, we're the only state whose home ownership rate never went below 60%. And so home ownership, given our sort of societal structure, kind of family structure, home ownership plays a huge part in that. And it helps us sort of grow as a state through home ownership.
So I like the program, and I like the cap because it's going to help drive new housing that will be affordable to someone. Because right now, what we're doing is just building housing, and and it's very expensive. And so I think that if we were to have the inventory, it will help with first-time home buyers, and then people can move up from there in the future.
So I have a follow. This question comes from a man named Timothy, individual named Timothy. What then can state and local government do right now to make rent affordable for lower income individuals and families? So this is a follow, right? We did one thing, right? If you had your way, or if you could wave your magic wand, what would be at the top of your list in terms of those things that haven't yet been addressed that we need to be looking at? Open question.
For me, that's a pretty simple. I'd love to see more funding in the Olean Walker Trust Fund. I think that would be a good step towards just incentivizing some
Do you want
additional.
to build that out and just let people know what you mean there?
Yeah, this is not my area of like legislative expertise, more personal expertise. But my understanding is this trust fund, which has been funded. I don't know if it has an ongoing appropriation or not, but typically gets a few $1 million every year, I think. And it can, in my understanding, make low interest loans out to projects that have affordable housing tied into them. So I think that's a huge step. If we can put more money in there and provide more of these low interest loans, that's a win for lower income renters.
Absent some transformational shift in how we approach this, it's about resources. There is simply a gap between what people can afford and what it costs to build. And how you're going to close that gap. Olean Walker's one marvelous tool, been just wonderfully successful here. Tax credits are another tool. There are direct appropriations for affordable housing. You're all familiar with the term Section 8. Section 8 is another attempt to close that gap in resources. The transformational change to which I was referring, I'm not sure what that is, to be honest with you. But I will tell you, I think part of the puzzle, this isn't the solution, this is just me trying to wrap my head around what the problem might be, but part of the puzzle is the fact that our expectations are very different today than they were, and I'm just 50 years ago, for example. What we build today is 3 or 4 times the size on a square foot per person, per occupant basis than it was 50 years ago. We're building bigger houses. Our expectation, and not just bigger houses, but bigger apartments, our expectations about what's going to be in them are here as opposed to it's changed. And that's not a criticism of those expectations, but it's part of the reality. We spend a lot more and we expect a lot more out of our housing than is historically accurate or historically referenced. It's kind of a common thing to blame public policy. Now they're overburdened with building codes and overburdened with zoning, and but most of those policies, most of those regulations have some foundation in life. There's a reason they're there. So we kind of have to ask ourselves, building codes have evolved, and there's a study that was done by the Home Builders Association nationally many years ago that suggested that 20% of the cost of a new home was due to unneeded regulation. And I think that number today is actually projected a little higher.
41%, exactly.
There you go. But if you look at each of those regulations, there's some reason it's there. Somebody said, this is important to us. And as a result, the cost of that home went up. So we've got this, in most cases, those regulations are there as a matter of safety, at least perceived safety, right? So we've got this tension. What's more important, safety or affordability? Right? I mean, those are sort of the structural changes that have evolved. That's how it's evolved. And I'm not aware of a lever to pull to change that. But I think having a real good grasp of that maybe starts to change the perception of the conversation just a little bit. You know, and I'm not picking on anyone when I say this, but I read just yesterday about a significant zone change proposed for Salt Lake City's downtown. Mandating taller buildings. And the article described, well, and if we have these tall buildings, we want this in them, and we want this in them, and we want this in them, and we want this. Well, hold on. You're just making it, both by virtue of mandating the taller building and by telling me I have to provide so much shop space, and you're just making it really hard for me to get, you know, a big piece of what our organization does is affordable housing. About half of what we do is income restricted in one way or another. You just make it really a lot harder for me to do that. You know, a taller building means a different structural system. It means more units. I get it. That's density. It craves density as a way to reduce cost, but you know, it's not always the solution, because with that density, now I got to figure out how to park it. So I'm going to go deeper in the ground and more. Well, I'm rambling a little bit. Sorry.
Tack onto that. I started working on a bill this past year reducing parking minimums, which I think is something Salt Lake City has already done. So I'd be happy to have that conversation at another time and see if there's a way to work around some of those things.
And that's marvelous. The city, Salt Lake City in particular, has been very progressive about reducing parking minimums, and that's awesome. But the truth of it is, as a marketing question, to make that residence marketable, most of the time I got to have a parking stall.
Thank you.
So I'd like to add, back to the resources, Only Walker has only received $2.2 million historically since 1995. And that has, the reason why that funding has never gone down is because they have to have a match for the federal funds that are coming to our state. And so by not investing, you know, over the years in, you know, housing people can afford, it really has given us a deficit. The program, I can't rave more, highly about it. They have, for every dollar that's invested, there's, you know, $13 that matches it. Over the years, it, you know, fluctuates. But that's a really important program, and we need to start investing in that, and we need to get a dedicated source for it. The other piece is that people are paying more than 50% of their income to housing. High majority, especially when you're extremely low income. And so if they have a hiccup, then most likely they can't pay their rent. And so, and rent needs to eat first. And so if we were to have some kind of fund where a renter could go and borrow $50, not at the corner, but, you know, a fund, to be able to pay their full rent, because most landlords won't take partial. So if they could pay their full rent, then they'd be solid, and then be able to pay that off in the next 5 months, opposed to, you know, next week to their brother or sister or to the corner, because it just puts them in the hole again. So we need to start thinking about that gap that people have in their rent.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? Yep. You referenced the federal match for the Only Walker Fund. Would it be appropriate for us then to also look at, you know, a communication with our elected officials around upping that minimum? Is there any conversation?
Well, this year they did give extra funding to Only Walker. They did give another $5 million.
Excuse me.
Oh, those are home dollars. Yes. We could definitely, and I just want to bring up that right now they're looking at cutting the HUD budget. And so we really need to be, you know, communicating to our representatives federally about the need in our community, because it's not being met. And it's been cut over the years. And so it's really important that we maintain those programs in our community.
Thank you. Dayon, any one thing at the state or the local level we should be doing?
Well, I like zoning reform. But I think part of the challenge, what I hear from developers often is, if you think of the Ford Motor Company, they can build cars on assembly lines and sell them in any state, no problem. With housing, every city has its own code, own zoning. So yeah, on the shell, almost everything looks the same, but it's just different enough that it's harder to replicate from one city to another. So I think that's, if we're thinking about supply, we need to think about efficiency. The construction industry has not, output per man hour has not changed since the 1980s on single family building. And, single family rentals make about 30% of our rental market. So it's not just in the apartments too. There are all other avenues that we can look at the rental market in Utah.
Thank you. I'd like to stay with you and ask you a question about some of the data that you shared earlier. And forgive me if
You're okay.
You'll correct me if I get this wrong. You said that, a white family or individual has $200,000 more in wealth, than others. And the data that I've pulled from the Gardner Institute is such that 32% of Black renters in Utah spend more than half of their incomes on housing. So obviously you've thought a bit about this. Where do we go from here? And what targeted support is there such that we can move the needle on those data points?
Yeah, I think there are others on this panel that are probably more equipped about specific programs, but I think, the racial disparities are all over the country. It's not a Utah unique problem, but we go back to zoning, zoning after desegregation and everything, or after the Civil Rights Act and everything, we divided up our cities. And so we've concentrated a lot. Your zip code is more determinant of your future wealth creation than almost anything. If you're, I can't remember the stat off the top of my head, but if you're born in the lowest of the lowest income bands in certain zip codes, you have like a 15% chance of out earning your parents. So I think looking at specific creation, programs that pull people, that give people a path. So I was a refugee when we came, and we had a path if we wanted to take it for job training, for education, for everything. And I don't know if that's available to everyone in the community, right? Like we bring refugees into our country and help them prosper, but are we giving the same opportunities to people that have been in intergenerational poverty for 100 years? So.
Tara?
I just wanted to point out that there's a great book, Color of Law, that people should read because it really goes in depth of the history behind redlining and how it continues to today. And also there's another book that was just released that's Poverty by America with Matthew Desmond. He wrote the book Eviction, which is an incredible eye-opening book when you think about how we're keeping people in poverty.
Okay, we talked a little about the Walker Fund, and a number of folks had questions, and this question specifically comes from an individual named Kyle, and he's looking to learn more about the increasing calls for community land trusts and or social housing solutions. Are there opportunities and what are the obstacles? Some are probably pretty obvious, but interested in your perspective on whether those could be a solution, perhaps not, here in the county, but elsewhere in the state.
I believe you can do it in this county as well. But I think we have a huge success in Grand County right now with Land Trust. It's an amazing project where there's straw-built homes, there's self-help homes, there's multifamily, there's senior. And this is going to really bring much needed housing to that area.
And could you tell us just a little bit more about how that came together?
I don't have the entire history, but I believe the land was donated by an individual, and they put it into a land trust, and it has evolved from there. And if anybody is down in that area, you really should do a tour of that particular property.
Nobody else wants to.
So y'all need to know, just before the start, Lauren leaned over to me and says, Dan, you don't need to answer every question.
I got the same prompt.
She'd heard that I sometimes get wound up on this stuff. Not really, no, we're grateful for her good help here this morning. Thank you. In social housing, I want to make sure I understand what that is. My interpretation of that is what historically we've referred to as public housing, owned by a public entity. Some of it is absolutely marvelous. Public housing is indispensable in many ways, but historically it's also, it's kind of black eye, right? I mean, nobody says, oh yeah, that's great, let's go do some more public housing. It's not as easy as it sounds, right? It gets back to that gap, the resources, and whether it's the land trust. I mean, it took a magnanimous donor to put the dirt into the deal, right? That didn't just materialize out of goodwill. I mean, it wasn't just, public housing requires those resources. Don't misunderstand, I'm a huge fan of public housing. In some places, I say it's absolutely indispensable. But anybody in the industry has grown up with stories about Cabrini Green, right? I mean, we've all heard that, and it's not just, oh, let's go do that. And I'm not sure I can tell you why. I'm not, in other countries, Finland is the one that comes to mind specifically. Quote unquote social housing or publicly owned housing is a huge part of the housing stock with apparently great success. Maybe there's some lessons for us to learn.
So another, I would say, space where we don't spend much time, and maybe for good reason, but I want to ask you what your thoughts are on it. And it came from a couple of readers as well, is rent control. Does it work? Is it too late?
Well,
Tara knew this is the one we were going to fight over ahead of time. Tara, go ahead.
we already have rent control. And it's through our developments of affordable housing. And so when you look at tax credits, they're built on what income level you're going to be addressing in that development. And so that's rent control there. But I'll let Dan take it from here.
No, Tara's absolutely right. It's in really rough terms. 1 out of 10 renter households in the state live in LIHTC units. And those are income restricted. They are rent controlled. In every sense, they are rent controlled. I'm not sure that's what the question was getting at, however. I think the question was getting at the New York or San Francisco model of rent control. And does it work? Well, it depends on your definition of work. It constrains rents for a select few households. Not few, a select group of households, right? But it also discourages new construction, discourages reinvestment in the product. I don't want to sound too broad sweeping in this, but the analysis of rent control over the years is not very encouraging. Right. It just, okay, there's a select group of households who find stability as a result of that. And stability is as important, in my view, as important as affordability. They find stability as a result of that. But the effects it has rippling out beyond that just overwhelm the benefits.
Yeah.
I would-
Oh, go ahead.
No, I heard.
I'll echo both of their points. I think it's great for individual buildings like a LIHTC projects. And I think if we enacted rent control across, the 4 Wasatch Front counties today, we would not see any new construction for a while, because while you're capping rents, costs keep going up, right? So your opportunity for a profit or for reinvestment, as Dan was saying, is eliminated. But, we kind of have the 30-year mortgage is in a way rent control too, right? So we have federal government providing the security of a 30-year mortgage. You're at the mercy of the county's tax assessors, but that's about it. So overall, I think focusing on a single projects is more effective than doing blanket wide.
So LIHTC works because there are resources invested in it, right? The rent controls that are effectuated as a result of the program are offset by the tax credits. That's just the very nature of the beast. The more common general reference to rent control, I get why it's attractive. I get it. It's something we can do. It's a lever we can pull. It'll make a difference. And you know what? It's free. Well, free to everybody except the owner of the property. There's no tax implicated. There's no tax burden generated as a result of that. It sounds like a really easy thing to do. And there is so much pressure on housing affordability today. We're looking around for those things. What are the things we can do? Well, that's one that doesn't take a lot to affect, but I think the impacts are they're scary.
So I would like to bring up, why should a landlord be supporting low-wage jobs? And so I'd rather look at not the increase in wages, but working with people to get money into the Only Walker Fund. Meaning, when a company comes in, why aren't we looking at their foundations and asking them to participate in trying to support their workers in the community? I mean, I look at how many chambermaids it takes downtown, and where are they living? And why aren't we working with some of these big corporations and having them partner with us to bring subsidy to that housing? So I always say, follow the money. Who's making money? Look at, when you're looking at Moab or Park City, you got Bogner, you got, all of those. So.
Do you want to jump in? Then I want to follow the money with you. We'd love to follow the money. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that's just been said. A lot of people, I think, just tend to look at rent control because it seems like an easy policy is kind of a silver bullet. I haven't seen the data to show that. However, the legislature has preempted cities from even attempting to look at rent control. So I would like to see that change. I wouldn't advocate necessarily for rent control on a state level or anything, but I think cities should be able to take that into consideration and see if they can find. We've got a lot of smart people here that I think could come up with something along those lines that might open up some new opportunities. So I would like to see the legislature revisit that. I know there was a bill run by Jennifer Daly Provo a couple of years ago, and that got voted down. And I'd love to see that come back and have that conversation again.
That and a minimum level for the lake, right?
Sure.
Sorry, that was Nate's bill. Okay, it should. That's all I'm saying. It should come back. That's all. Yeah, support it. That was not
More to
her.
come on
Sorry.
that.
Okay, good. Following the money. You mentioned Moab. You mentioned Park City. We have a significant tourism presence in Washington County as well. And I think already there are some differentiators for first and second homeowners with respect to what we're paying in property taxes. Interested in your thoughts on, and this came from a reader as well, property tax as a lever to potentially put more money into, let's say, something like the Only Walker Fund for second or third homeowners in some of these areas where we know we have a high degree of, resource.
So let me make sure I understand that question.
Yeah.
Did you just suggest that by raising property taxes, we can make homeownership more affordable?
This is a reader question.
No, but I mean, that's how
Yes,
I mean, I think that's how
Yes.
simple the equation is.
yes, that's the
You
question.
can't tax housing and make it more affordable on a broad basis. Okay, I get it. You can shift it around. If here's the stack of housing, you can shift some from here to here, but the net effect is all of it is now more expensive. You can't make it more affordable by making it more expensive. If affordable housing is a public good, if we all embrace that, it needs to be funded that way. We need to respond to it that way. And quit, this is going to sound really critical, but we need to quit looking for the easy button. It doesn't exist. You don't get to just go punch that. It's done.
Yes, and when it's hard, we don't get any traction, right? And I'm not suggesting that this is the solution, right? But how do we elevate a conversation around solutions when it is so very complicated?
Well, I'm counting on Nate and Dayana Tara to get in the room and solve it.
Tara, did you have a perspective on that question?
Well,
Property taxes.
I would say that I see merit in that. And I see it that maybe the third or fourth home, because of the VRBOs, short-term rentals. They're taken away from the stock of housing people could afford in some of these, especially our tourism areas. And I also want to point out that, again, we've only invested $2.2 million. They say 3 now, but 2.2. I'm going to hold to it. That we invest so much money in tourism just in advertising. And so by bringing people to our state, the very people that we expect to host them, we have no infrastructure for them. And so I think if we're going to continue to live off tourism, then we need to build the infrastructure for people to be able to work in those fields.
I'd agree with Tara's perspective on that one. I think that seems like I think Wyoming potentially did something along those lines. I don't know the results yet of an additional tax on second and third home ownership in Jackson Hole, I think specifically where that exists at a large scale. I'd love to see us do more investigation there.
Technically, I think we already tax second homes.
Higher at a second home, right, yeah.
Depending on how they self-identify. But to the point on short-term rentals, I think it's, as Tara said, it's much more prevalent. Half of the homes in Park City, about 49%, I think, are listed on some sort of short-term renting platform. In Salt Lake City, it's less than 1%. So in Salt Lake City, you can't really say that it's a problem compared to what it is in Moab, what it is in other areas. So, I have the data I can show you. But it's still only less than 1%.
No.
Oh, well, I'll show you the study. We'll happy to share the data with you.
What neighborhood you're in.
This is true. Yes. So you may have covered this, but this question came from a reader named Jeff. And he's interested in, with all the new builds, right? Is there a positive impact on rental rates, right? We know that, from 2020 to 2022, we saw a 10% increase, right. In that rental rate. But are there any good downstream impacts to all of the building that's happening, principally downtown?
Well, so good is a relative term. Depends if you're a renter or if you're an owner. I think, COVID came at a very interesting time for the downtown market. I think we have so much steam and we're returning. If you look at some of the national sort of comparisons, downtown Salt Lake City has been one of the poster childs for recovery, right? But at the same time, we're building, luxury housing that hasn't been there in our market before. And relatively speaking, given all the difficulties we've had with COVID, it's doing okay, but there's more coming, right? If we look at what's coming over, this year and the next 3 years, that's already under the construction. I think we have roughly 6,000 units coming downtown into a market that's, in 2021 absorbed just under 1,000 units, right? So that absorption will take a minute. And I think, we'll see downtown vacancies increase and possibly some concessions on rents. So I expect to see that. I don't think it'll be dramatic, right? I think it'll vary more by building, but it will have a net decreasing effect on asking rents. If we go further out to the suburbs, they're not building as many as apartments, so their apartment markets are going to stay tighter. So I think we will see, relief for renters in particular nooks, but it's not going to be relevant. But, the balance of supply and demand works. If you build more in an area that typically hasn't had more, it'll pull. And there is a positive effect on the surrounding buildings too. I think we often vilify luxury housing, but it's housing. So that means, if I can afford $3,500 rent, today I'm paying, maybe $2,500. But then this great new building comes up and it has all these great amenities. I'm going to move up, and that creates a downstream effect as well eventually too. So just more housing in general is good for relieving rent increases.
I suppose this is maybe the converse of that question to some degree, but Stefan writes that he's interested in learning more about the impact of rising rental prices on homelessness here in Utah, and if any of you have a perspective on that.
We're looking at you.
So can you repeat the question?
Yeah, as prices have increased, is there a downstream effect in
Oh, absolutely.
homelessness, and how you are viewing that?
Definitely. We are seeing more and more people showing up in the system that have been evicted or, needed to move out, was unable to be still on somebody's couch. We're definitely seeing a lot more people doubled and tripled up. And when you look at the McKinney-Vento definition, this year there was a huge increase in homeless students. And so definitely we're seeing the increase of homelessness. We don't have a really good system, I would say, in place to really kind of track some of that in terms of, if they were evicted, is it definitely, they're asking right now at the shelter level whether they're showing because they were evicted, or if they've been evicted in the last year, or they have not been able to be housed because of an eviction. But it's more or less just a question. It's not verified. So I think, we can take a look at that. But definitely people they can't afford to live in the community. And so we're seeing them on the street. And if you really look at the people who are sheltered previously, there's a lot of people working. So,
to me, our first priority should just be keeping people in the homes they already have, and that's the easiest way to avoid homelessness. So I think I'd love to see more, emergency rental programs and those sorts of things. I think Tara maybe mentioned that earlier, but that seems like a really positive step where if someone just needs $50 or $500 to pay their rent for a month, and that'll keep them in a home for the next year, that's a huge step, and that's something we should be looking more at.
Okay.
Yes, please. So, we keep continuing to talk about rent. So what is the definition of rent? I think we really need to look at that because it's advertised as $800 a month, but yet there's so many fees that are added onto that. It's not included. And when we're looking at stabilization, how, people paying more than 50% of their income to housing, does that include the fees? I mean, so I really think, we need to in the future be looking at that.
That's a great suggestion. Good story idea for us. Thank you.
When I've signed leases, you see a number on there, and then you get a $99 entertainment package and a garbage fee and other stuff. There was one place I rented from a few years ago, a property management company. I mean, they were tacking $12 a month on for something. I don't even know what it was, and it was not part of the initial contract. So I don't think most people dig in enough to see some of that, and there should be some more stringent guidelines on, what needs to be shared up front.
That's great. We're going to move to our last question, final question for our panelists. Thank you all. I learned a lot, and I hope others have as well, before we close. And I acknowledge that this is a transformational change, is difficult. And we're talking about an issue that's fairly complicated. And yet, I'm going to ask you, what's working elsewhere? What have you seen that we should be bringing to either the local level or to our state? Are there, the example that a reader named Laura provides, are there employers who are subsidizing rent for employees? Are there collaborative efforts to build out funds at a higher number than 2.2 million? What have you seen as you've worked in this space that may be working elsewhere that we should be considering?
Yeah, I mean, we just recently, in the last couple of years, we started, we have a preservation fund of saving naturally affordable housing, right? I think the Harvard Center for Housing Studies a couple of years ago put out, as a country, we've lost 30% of our low affordable housing stock. So that's like $600 and below on rent. In Utah, we've lost like over 40% of our housing stock between 2011 and 2019. So, building new affordable housing is really hard and really expensive. So preserving it is maybe a little easier. So preserving already what you have, so it doesn't, a lot of times, especially in, the last couple of years, we've seen stuff that's relatively affordable. Venture fund will buy it, do some upgrades and jack up the rents. And now those people living there that were paying $700-800, their new rent is $1,200. So that immediately creates a disparity. So just plugging the boat from getting more water into it is important right now.
I'll take the easy answer. I think the workforce housing idea is where we're really targeting new housing towards teachers, police officers, firefighters, those sorts of things, and working with companies, I guess, as well, and providing opportunities for them to build housing directly for their employees close to their place of employment. I think there's some work going on that with, I think it's former Representative Waldrip on the Perpetual Housing Fund. So I'd love to see that move forward and continue working on things to address that need. I think that has been shown to provide some benefits in other places, and I think it makes total sense here in Utah.
Yeah. Also, I'll bring up City of Cambridge out of Massachusetts. I have a lot of these, so I'll shut up after this one. But for example, City of Cambridge, they have a quick approval process for affordable housing. Mm-hmm. So if Dan is building one of his LIHTC projects, affordable projects, and it hits all these criteria, you don't have to go through the pitchfork committee of the public process. You're bringing a public good, and you hit all the check marks, you hit your permits and everything, and that speeds up the process. I think one of the most challenging issues right now is timing, whether, when you go, even when you get city council approvals, just until this session, that wasn't the final stamp, right. Your project could still be overturned. So just having a little bit more prediction in timing and outcomes, I think goes a long way.
Dedicated source for affordable housing. That's many states have that, and we do not have a dedicated source. So working on that, I think, would be really helpful.
That's good.
Well, I would echo some of what Dan just said. As a developer, I crave predictability. I'm looking for some certainty, and when that's as a certainty coefficient goes up, right, my need for return goes down, right? The risk is mitigated, right? And in affordable housing, that's a really important thing, because the risk, the return on affordable housing is already suppressed. It's already hampered, if that's the right word. And so if I know I have a clear path, not because I get a pass on all the normal requirements, but because I have a checklist and I've satisfied the checklist and I get there, much easier for me to start spending money right away and doing more affordable housing. I think that's kind of one of the laws of the market, right? Is give me that clear path, that predictability, and I can do more quicker and do so with greater confidence, which inspires. You get the point.
That's good. Thank you. All right. Well, let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you. And maybe you can stick around if folks have specific questions for you for a couple minutes. We are live streaming. You can watch or share the video. It's at the YouTube channel for the Gardner Institute. And we will do this again soon. We hope you join us. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Here, I can move it too. I have it right here. Yeah. Okay. Do you need?
Why not?
Oh, you have that one, I think. Yeah.